welcome everybody that's here present and also on Facebook Live. I'll say that again for Facebook. Welcome. Hello, I'm Roy Shamir, and I'm the co-chair with Steve Ward for the Audio Engineering Society New York section here on the right coast. Those are my friends on the left coast, or the wrong coast. We are pleased to be here at Dubway Studios in the famous Greenwich Village area. We put together another great panel together for you today. Sorry about that. You'll be able to present questions in the Facebook comments as well as hear from the live audience. We do our question and answer a little bit later. And we'll be having a raffle in a little while for an NFR copy of Immersive Audio Pro, Immersive Machines
Immersive Master Pro.
Immersive Master Pro, Immersive Machines Premier software. And we would also like to take the opportunity to let everyone know that as an AES member in the tri-state area, that we're going to be having, we're going to welcome you guys to try to join in with us on the committee. If you're interested, please get in touch. We'll be having, as I said, we'll be looking for people to start joining in on our committee. If you're interested, please get in touch. You can reach us at the AES New York Section at Gmail. It's AES New York Section at gmail.com. And we'll be having an election for new officers in the near future. So if you're interested in that, please let us know and you'll become a candidate for one of those positions. Also, we have another event coming up on April 9th, and that will be another great event at Post Lab 1, which is another studio here in town. And we'll be presenting Professor Jill Lintz regarding her invention and presentation of atom tones. Explain that later. So without further ado, I'm going to get out of the chair and let me introduce the host of our recurring series, Meet the Makers, and that is Denise Barbarita. So please everyone welcome Denise.
Thanks, Denise.
Hello. Am I in position? Let me see. Hi. We're on camera. So, welcome to the second edition of Meet the Makers, where we at AES New York Section shine a light on specifically New York City adjacent audio gear manufacturers and software companies. We're here tonight to have an in-depth discussion about the future of immersive audio and the ideas driving the Immersive Machines team. Nathaniel Reichman, Al Houghton.
Yes.
And thank you.
Bullseye.
Thank you very much, Bob Brown. He's the easy one. So why don't you guys, just going to give you guys the opportunity to introduce yourselves instead of reading from script. So Nathaniel, why don't we start with you?
So one of the reasons that this event is special for me is because this project is definitely out of my comfort zone. Right, most of the time I'm spent producing, mixing things. I work in post-production, I work in music. So being on the software side is definitely something that I'm not familiar with, but now I am after the last couple of years of adventure. And when we're not doing this, Al and I are working on TV shows and albums together. So, Al.
Okay, well, yes, Nathaniel and I work on a bunch of music and audio post stuff, but neither one of us has ventured into software development. So we're both kind of, hanging out the window there. But the need and the Nathaniel's, genius idea from the pits was so attractive and so obvious. It just seemed like we should do this. And it seemed like it would be not overly difficult. It seemed like a very simple idea at the time. So, and as a studio owner, for me, it was it made a lot of sense as a very ergonomic and smart way to make it easier for engineers and for their clients, therefore, to take advantage of the whole immersive thing that's going on these days.
Bob?
Yeah, I'm Bob Brown. I'm the lead developer behind the Immersive Master Pro. I'm a little bit of a musician, as you can probably see behind me, but I definitely on the technical side, I've been doing software development for probably the last 25 or 26 years, the majority of that in the audio video media space. And yeah, it's, the Immersive Master Pro has been a fun project to work with Nathaniel and Alan and bring that to life.
Great. So Nathaniel, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah.
Anybody who knows you knows that you are a big proponent of Atmos. I know that because we talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
So when you were initially considering creating the software, what was the problem that you felt needed solving within the Atmos workflow?
Yeah, so I want to back it up. I don't need to tell this room too much about this, but I want to back it up for 1 minute, which is like, I'm so glad this format is here.
Yeah.
Right, because we've been needing a way to break out of stereo and do more.
Right.
Right, artists have been asking for it. Pieces of music have been written with musicians all around you, you know, so this has been in the ether for a long time. And we can go back, we'll talk about it later, but there's a whole history of formats leading up to this moment that either succeeded or failed, right? So I'm really glad we're at this moment now.
Yeah.
So the impetus behind the software was the fact that we're dealing with a new ecosystem of file formats, right? So I was reminding myself, what was it like when we were in the studio in 2005, right? Managing media and doing sessions and doing recordings and mixes and mastering and delivering things, you know, for CD replication or to go onto television. And that ecosystem of file formats and expectations has totally changed. We have new file formats now. Some of them are open and some of them are proprietary, but they're dealing with immersive audio. And I felt like as this part of the industry was growing, there was a need for software tools that would be managing those files. So like the simplest thing when we describe our software is like, if I have to say one thing, one line, is this is batch processing for Atmos files. Now our program does a lot more than that, but that was the basis, which is like, we need to do batch processing. Nobody's doing batch processing, so it seemed obvious to me, let's be the batch processor for Atmos. You know?
Great.
Yeah.
And I read on the website that initially you relied on a makeshift Python script that ran through a command line interface that worked fairly well, but you thought, we can do better.
Yeah.
Did you develop that code on your own, or was that something you and Bob worked on together? I'd like you to walk us through the timeline. How did you and Bob and Al get together? Was this collaborative from the start, like one of those situations where you're in a session and Al comes in, hey Nathaniel, how you doing?
Right.
God damn it, I wish that we could do X. And he's like, why can't we? Seems pretty simple. And then, you know, and then it just kind of went on from there, you know? I mean, how hard could it be?
Yep.
So how hard was it? And how did you guys wind up collaborating together?
So Al and I started our first official Atmos project in 2017. And we didn't have, it wasn't streaming demand yet, but certain clients were looking for it, so we kind of knew it was on the horizon. And during those years, I'd say 2017 to 2021, Dolby was very keen on meeting producers who wanted to work in the format, right? So we would have meetings with Dolby and talk about kind of where we could go and what we could do. And at the time, I thought it was going to be a very niche thing. Al and I started doing, there was a client that needed live concerts recorded, you know, 2-hour-long concerts recorded, and turned out as live albums. And what they were interested in doing was making an immersive audio experience of you being at the concert. So if it's a live festival, it's like you're in the crowd. Or if you're in a concert hall, you're sitting in the middle of the hall. So the demand was there to take existing artists and say, okay, sure, you have a studio album, but you don't have a live album. The live album should also be Atmos. So we were mixing a lot of albums quickly, and it's different than a studio album because it's often continuous music or a whole series of songs, right? So I would, instead of mixing it kind of a more conventional sense where you say, here's my session, I'm going to mix one song or one movement of a piece and then close the session and go on to the next one, I would have all 2 hours of the concert in one session. So I would mix it as one long continuous experience. And then only toward the end of the process would I find out where the track index is for the album, right? And so it's the 11th hour, you know, literally 11 o'clock at night. Oh, here are the tracks. The track just came in. It's a 2-hour thing. I know now. I know now that it's 35 tracks. And cutting Atmos files is really tricky because it's not like cutting a WAV file.
Mm.
And the existing tools for taking large master files and slicing them up quickly into individual master files, and everyone in the audience here is probably already pretty well, you know, pretty familiar with the format. That was the challenge.
You
And
heard the collective sigh.
yeah, exactly.
Right? Okay.
Exactly, and it goes back to the proprietary formats, because if you're cutting a WAV file, it's very different than if you're cutting an Atmos file, because you have to preserve metadata, and there's a whole list of technical considerations. So at that time, it was frustrating. It took a long time. The tools that were available were really clunky, and I don't want to diss Dolby, but Dolby was kind of seeding the market and saying, here we have some existing tools, we're expecting more tools to come. So the existing tools are very basic. One night, and this is really the start of Immersive Master Pro, one night I noticed, while looking through kind of some obscure Dolby documentation, that some of the applications can be run on the command line.
Okay.
And I thought, I'm not really a programmer, Bob knows this, but I thought, well, if it can be run on the command line, I can batch process, because I can prep these commands and run them all as a group, right? And do track in and outs and things like that. So that was the basis for me doing this command line interface. We had a talented intern who knew Python better than I did. And he's like, oh, you should do this and this and that. So we had the Python script, we had the command line tool, and we had the spreadsheet, and we were kind of putting all that together. And that was before I met Bob.
That sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, well, it was a fun nightmare, because we were solving a problem in what I thought was a creative way, but it was really clunky.
Well, it's also testimony to what a nightmare the actual process was if you didn't have this Python script, because
Gotcha.
to make him actually get up and do that,
Yeah.
surely he was not enjoying the alternative.
Yeah, the process would take 3 or 4 hours, but I could cut it down to 45 minutes. I was like, well, this is useful. You know.
That's incredibly useful.
Yeah.
So I guess the next question would be, how did Bob become part of the team? Did you just decide we need somebody who knows more than me, and you guys collectively put your heads together and decided that Bob was the guy, or maybe
Well, Bob
would
is the
like to-
guy, yeah.
Well, yeah. But
That
you
is
know,
really
how
true,
did
yeah.
Bob? How did you become involved in the team, and what, without giving away secrets, how did you, wind up taking this Python script and turning it into something more manageable?
Sure. So I was just actually looking back at my notes, and I think we started this project, at least from getting connected up with Nathaniel and Al, almost 2 years ago, like I would almost say to the date. And I had actually met Nathaniel through Production Expert, and Pro Tools expert, Production Expert. He had reviewed some other software that I make as part of my own company, and I think we were just messaging back and forth, and he might have even sent me an email and said, hey, any software developers could help build this? And I said, well, I can help you. And so the past 5 years I've been doing consulting, contracting, working on my own products. And prior to that, I spent about 4 or 5 years working at DTS Xperi, working on the what was called MDA, which was a competing immersive format to Dolby Atmos. And we also worked on some of the SMPTE standards for what's called IAB, or Immersive Audio Bitstream, which is effectively the Dolby bitstream in a standardized format. And so, yeah, Nathaniel said, hey, I've got this script, it runs some Dolby tools. I'd like to see about building, kind of a user interface to do that. And we took the original concept from the scripts and the Dolby tools, wrapped it in an application, and then eventually got hooked up with the Dolby, kind of the developer side of Dolby, where they provide support for folks making tools, and we got some help from them. They have some software development kits that they provide, and we, kind of spec'd out the product and started building it kind of, I'll say the official way, not that the scripts were an unofficial way, but a more studio consumer friendly kind of mechanism for that. And we worked with a couple UI designers and a few other folks kind of bringing the product to life. And I think we shipped the first version, what was that, in September?
October of last year was our shipping.
October of last year, so,
about
about
1.0 release.
AES.
Yeah, exactly. That was it.
Done a few bug fix updates to that, and we've got a 1.1 version coming soon.
Yeah.
Great. So, most of us here are Pro Tools users for the most part. Some, use those other DAWs that will remain nameless. But as a programmer, Bob, what do you wish all of us as Pro Tools users or other DAW users know about making audio software that we don't? In other words, what are the things that get overlooked in the relationship between programmers and users, and what do you suppose we as users might benefit from getting to know more of?
Yeah, so I started my career working at DigiDesign, or it was technically owned by Avid, but I started back in '99 working on Pro Tools, and I spent about 15 years as one of the main developers on Pro Tools before I went over to DTS. I've worked a couple different places, but the past 5 years I've been doing work as an independent, and one of the things I really like about that is I actually get to work with people like Nathaniel and interact with end customers. And I think that's actually kind of a rarity, and I think that's actually a really cool thing. Is most software developers actually love talking to customers because we get to hear about people using the thing that we built or the thing that we slaved over, and so I think that's one thing that end users don't realize is that actually developers love talking to users, because usually there's like customer support or product guys or whoever in between that. So I think that's one thing. If you have the chance, especially with small development shops, reach out to the developers, talk to them. They actually really love that. Gets really good feedback. I get to know exactly how the customers are using the tool, and get feedback for how to make it better. I think the other, so that's the positive side. Maybe the negative side is software development's really hard, especially when you're working with really complex systems or working with companies like Dolby or Avid or Adobe. Sometimes it's not our fault. Sometimes it's the challenges of working with those companies, that either the tools that they provide us or the support. It's not always our fault, and it's really complex to build robust software that supports all the formats. And Nathaniel and I have been going over this the past couple of days with Immersive Master Pro exports 15 different variations of channel layouts, and we're finding a few discrepancies between Pro Tools and the Dolby tools and our tool, and trying to sort that out. And so if you think about 2 sample rates, 15 channel formats, and 3 tools, that's a lot of staring at spreadsheets and a lot of testing to make sure it gets right. And so it's challenging to build solid software that works reliably for professionals, but it's a lot of fun.
So just an ironic, sidebar here, which is that Dolby, which is the company pioneering multi-channel immersive delivery, does not have clear standardization when it comes to channel layouts inside of interleave files, right? And yeah, so you'd think of all companies, right? And we love Dolby. You'd think that there'd be clarity there, and the marketplace is very difficult. And Bob went down a rabbit hole recently with finding out how different workstations interpret CAF files, multi-channel files.
Is that something you think will become standardized thanks to your software?
No, because I think what the reason it won't, and this is what I realized, and we could go on 2 hours about just this one topic alone, is that Avid has had to accommodate the whole history of multi-channel audio since the beginning of digital audio.
Right.
Right. So yesterday, Bob called me and said, "Hey, our files are being interpreted as SDDS files." Well, who the heck is using SDDS right now? Right?
No one.
Yeah, exactly. So that it's a complex world out there. So yeah, sidebar.
I do understand that. Yeah. And as an aside question, and it's not really a question, it's maybe just something that I think about a lot. I feel that sometimes software companies, DAWs, has a tendency to do update after update after update, basically solving for things that weren't problems rather than fixing actual problems or workflow issues. And I wonder if that's, Bob, as a software developer, what do we users do? Who do we talk to say stop? What is the way for us as Pro Tools users to get in touch with people who actually do the software design?
Well, with Avid, I haven't worked for Avid for probably 10 years now. I mean, I still know some folks that work there, and the official channels are going through customer support. If you're a beta tester, they have a beta program you can join, and that's actually probably the most direct way, because you'll get early versions of the software, and there's a kind of an internal forum where you can provide feedback. And while in the final stages of development, that's the ideal time to get the bugs listed or the complaints voiced, because you're working directly with kind of the beta managers or the product owners and the developers. You're not going through customer support. But once the software is out in the field, it's really going through customer support. And, a company like Avid, or I don't want to pick on Avid, large companies, there's 1,000 employees or 10,000 employees. There's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of people, and it can be very hard to get that through. Me as an independent or a small company, and there are plenty of small software companies and plugin developers. A lot of times you can just reach out to the team itself. There's not that many people. You can find them on LinkedIn or through their websites. And
recording in progress.
Me personally, I like it when folks are reaching out, because I actually know, they're using my software, and they may be bumping into problems, and I'm sorry that you ran into a problem, but I work really hard to get those things fixed. And kind of this idea of lots of versions of software, one of the challenges is fixing a bug and not causing some other problem. Ideally you want to incrementally make it better, and you don't want to have things, you don't want to hang your software up for too long. And so I think that's why a lot of companies do a lot of little patch fixes or bug fixes after release. It's like something slipped out through our testing or our beta cycle. Let's get a patch out as soon as we can. I know it can be frustrating from users, but the alternative is like, we're only going to release software once a year, or once every 6 months, and you got to live with your bugs. So there's a balance between there.
I hear that. What can you tell us in terms of the nuts and bolts behind Immersive Master Pro, Bob? I know you're working with the file formats and technology from Dolby. For those of us who aren't programmers, can you talk about what an SDK is and how you make apps and plugins? And what is this thing called Juice, Juice, that we hear about?
Yeah, so the way I approach software is I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I don't want to write code that other people have written and proven. And so there are a lot of things called frameworks or SDKs. SDK means a software development kit. And so that's usually code that is provided by another company. So like in our case, Dolby, they have an official developer program, and they provide, their SDKs provide some code, some documentation, some examples, and then a certification test. And the Juice framework is if you Google Juice, Juce, it is a framework that's been around for probably 15 or 18 years. It originates from the developers of Traction software, so the Traction digital audio workstation. Those folks, they built Traction, and then they kind of spun Juice out of that. And so Traction is built on Juice, and Juice is now independently owned by Pace, the iLok guys. They bought the software, not Traction portion of it, but the Juice framework. They bought that 2-3 years ago. It's a great software development platform for doing audio and video and media processing. It's got tons and tons of stuff in there, and it's got very liberal licensing. You can do kind of open source stuff for free, and you can do projects like we're doing kind of as an indie company at a very, very reasonably priced licensing. And so we pay license fees to Juice/Pace for access to the software. And then with Dolby, they provide their development partners with these SDKs that have some software and some examples, and probably most importantly, certification test. And so when we build our software, we have to run a pretty large number of tests proving that we did it right, that we passed their certification. And then we submit the results back to Dolby. They run those same tests to prove that our software is doing the right thing, and then they give us a Dolby certification, which allows us to ship our software and say, hey, we're Dolby certified. You can trust it.
The metaphor when I'm looking over Bob's shoulder when he's working, and I'm thinking about what we got to do next. The metaphor that keeps popping into my head all the time, if you're not familiar with software development, is that we've been given a big bag of Lego bricks from Juice, and we got another bag of Lego bricks from Dolby, right? And you can build anything you want, but you're using their Legos, right? And and it's amazing how, I don't want to say quickly, because we've spent a lot of time in development, but it's amazing that everything's available. Right? You've got a toolkit that's ready to go. So if you can think about it, here's how you put these things together. So I often feel like it's...
Yeah, I think that's a really great analogy because, that's the value that Immersive Master Pro is adding, right? We're taking, Dolby's already built tools that are built on the same code, and some are really great, some are very rudimentary, and we get to look at the software kits and go, hey, here's what we're allowed to do. Here's the things they, kind of the toolbox or the bricks they give us. What crazy ideas can we come up with to make it actually better solve the user needs? And so we get to put it together and build our own user interface and get really customize the workflows the way that we think they should work for our workflows.
Excellent. So Al, you've been so quiet over there. How you doing?
These guys are blabbermouths. Again, I mean, for I will say, as far as the software development and the beta testing and everything, it's in a little company like ours, which you're basically looking at right now. It's very gratifying for me, who's a total Luddite with the software. I don't have to deal with any of it, but these guys are very responsive and empathetic to the users who are, by the way, loving the software, but I'll always come up with, no, wouldn't it be nice if you did this, or where's the button for this, or whatever. And they're pretty much instantly attended to one way or another. Just like, well, that's a great idea, we're gonna start doing it, and it'll happen pretty quickly. So there's a lot of responsiveness on these guys' part, because there's just a lot of pride in the product, and it's a great feeling to have that going on.
Yeah, there's that cheesy idea, you're driven by your users. Well, our company's so small, right, that I do know who's using it, and I get a lot of feedback from beta, and so we've added features pretty quickly. Right after AES, we did a couple of things that were adjusting the way that we do mastering, so you can preserve the relationship of ADM files in an already mastered album. And then, and we'll talk about this more later tonight, but we have a big release coming out, hopefully next week. The release was certified on Monday, and I have to do the documentation around it. It's a new version. We've got a feature that I didn't even think was a good idea, but all of our beta testers are like, we really need this. And it's called Remove Silent Channels, right? Because a lot of people have these giant mixing templates where you have a big template that might take a lot of advantage of all 128 channels. But in a particular track that you're working on, you might not use all those. Turns out that labels and QC departments want that taken care of, right? So it's very simple. I would say it's a simple feature, but it was straightforward for us to add relatively quickly. We're also handling metadata much better in a more thorough way than we did the version 1.0 because we're doing trim and downmix now. Our editing has gotten better, our loudness has gotten better. So all these things are things that we looked at and said, oh, here are these users who are really asking for this. We need to go forward here. So it's been, yeah.
So that just triggered
Yeah.
a thought.
Yeah.
Integrated loudness.
Yeah.
You touch upon it on your website, but for those of us in the audience who may not really understand the whole concept, can you explain it to us a little bit?
Yeah, well, we have some real gearheads here, so I got to make sure I get this right. So, I mean, a long time ago, with the digital audio recording, you could measure dBFS, which is decibel full scale, which is the loudest individual sample in the file, right? And so if you were to normalize something, you'd be taking the loudest sample and bringing it up close to, or even up to, all the way up to digital zero. We since have a more sophisticated way of measuring peaks called dB true peak. That's not what you asked, so I won't go there.
No.
But if you don't know what true peak is, you should know. Integrated loudness, and I think the best way to describe this is when the COM Act came in and made television loudness more similar between TV commercials and TV programming, which is measuring just the peak is not a great way of how we as humans kind of experience audio, right? So the average loudness, and this is measured, the terms that we use are LKFS or LUFS, which is the same, it's two different names for the same measurement, which is the average perceived loudness over time. And to do integrated loudness correctly, you can't measure one instantaneous sample. What you have to do is you got a set of time windows, which cumulatively pick up the loudness. So there's an infinite time window where you can measure the length of a TV program that's half an hour and say, oh, at the end of the TV program, you're at about minus 25 lux. Okay, you're kind of in the zone for European TV. And then there's a short-term window, which is like measuring how loud something is over a 3-second window. So you get those numbers together and you get an integrated loudness number, which says, here's how loud your mix is. The reason this is such a hot topic right now when we're dealing with Atmos is because, I know this is a strong thing to say, and there's been a lot of players, so I don't want to just credit Dolby, but if you have to choose one company and one effort that really ended the loudness wars. I felt like it was the beginning of music streaming, like Dolby and Apple and Tidal getting together and creating rules for music delivery and ending the loudness wars. And Apple's effort too, because iOS devices now get delivered to the consumer with soundcheck default on, which means the integrated loudness of every track in your music collection is being calculated and adjusted for when you start listening.
Right.
So when you're making an Atmos mix, we all get obsessed over this number. And it's not exactly the right number, but a lot of people get obsessed over this number 18, which is your music mix can't be more than minus 18 integrated loudness. We measure integrated loudness. I'll go over this quickly because it's technical. I think most of you already know this, but an Atmos master file is 128 channels, so it's hard to measure. Like, what are you going to do? So there's a SMPTE standard, and I forget. Maybe Bob can remind me of it. I forget what number SMPTE standard it is.
It's the EBU standard, EBU R128.
Well, no, I'm getting to that. But it's
Okay.
it's SMPTE that defined the way to measure it is by doing a 5.1 down mix.
Right.
Gotcha.
So you do a 5.1 down mix of your immersive master file, and then you measure the 5.1 down mix. And what we're doing in Immersive Master Pro is we're using EBU R128.
Okay.
Now it turns out that Dolby is using, I think, the same thing. So our numbers are down to the 100th. We're very tight with Dolby's loudness guidelines. Even though our code is a little bit different, we're down to the 100th in terms of measurement. So we're pretty accurate with that.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a long answer. Sorry.
No, but I
Yeah.
think it's important to,
Yeah.
make sure that people understand what that term means.
Yeah.
So Al, as the founder of Dubway Studios and as a studio owner for many decades, you have seen a lot of changes over the years. And where does immersive fit into it as a whole? Like, do you feel that it's the absolute future of everything, or are you semi-apprehensive? Are you, because there are lots of people who say lots of things about Atmos.
He was
in
around for
general.
Quad.
Well, there you go.
That was the real.
I remember putting reverb in the back bus.
Well, I'm kind of an open-minded person. I'm less fascistic about certain things. So part of me is like, if it's a good song, the MP3 is all you need. On the other hand, I did hear a pop mix in here that was a Elton John tune from the 70s. And it was a great mix. It's a huge tune, Rocket Man. And somebody did a Atmos mix of it. And I'm like, okay, well, it'll probably be pretty good, And I listened to it, and I was kind of blown away. Like, it was like they turned up the steroids on this mix. It's kind of hard to describe, but it was, when everything's in two speakers.
That's a famous mix.
Okay, well, good. So,
Yeah.
Do you know who mixed it?
Greg Wells.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Go on.
Well, the backup vocals are mixing with piano, mixing with the guitars and everything. They're in two speakers. And it's like, it's great. You can hear everything. But then you hear the Atmos version, and the vocals are coming out from behind you, and the guitar's over there, and everything's all around you. And that means everything can be super loud. Like super loud, like way hyped up. So the backup vocals, you hear them perfectly, like they're featured. And every instrument seems kind of like it's featured. And for me, that was like, wow. As sort of a punk, like anti hyped up, hi-fi thing. This is like went against my grain, but I had to say, wow, this is a pleasure to listen to, and this is really be great for music to be able to listen to all music this way. If only I could do that. So I think if they could convince me, as salty old, half-deaf engineer, to love it, maybe there is a future in it. The tricky thing is that I'm in this room with, 11 or 12 speakers, and it's, that's different from somebody listening to it at home. But
On a soundbar.
yeah. But on the other hand, I haven't really listened on a soundbar, so I don't know. Maybe it's still kind of augmented that way.
I mean, you've said to colleagues and clients how important the car music experience is. What is it about cars and music listening that's so compelling?
I think cars are one of the best things that ever happened to music, for sure. Because when you get in your car and you turn on the music, you're often just by yourself, no one's around, it's a controlled environment, it's all yours, there's no phones ringing or, you know, hardly ever. And you're just by yourself for half an hour or an hour. It's just immersive. It's kind of an immersive, in the old term of the word, experience. So, you know, rock and roll like totally took over when there's a little transistor radio there. You know, to the point where people, when they're mixing, they go out and they like listen to the mix in the car, make sure it sounds good. You know, at this point with immersive, it's a pretty great opportunity because the cars they can put these great sound systems in, and you are surrounded in what is a very controlled environment. This particular car sounds like this, and maybe some cars are, you know, have a higher noise floor or more sound isolated than others. But you know, you can really define that space pretty precisely. So you can do immersive mixes for cars, and it can be very it can be perfect for that car. So I would think you could be driving along and your best, you know, as it is, your favorite tune comes on and it's great. But when something just comes up and envelopes you, that's going to be really fabulous.
What studio was it that used to have a little control room that was a car? Was that Hit Factory or was it Sony? Rowie would know.
You could drive your car into the elevator at Hit Factory. Sony had a car-like thing in the basement.
Back in the day.
I love it.
So, speaking of, there have been so many attempts to move beyond mono and stereo over the years. We've had quad, we've had SACD, now it's Atmos, ambisonics, things of that sort. What do you see the future as being? Do you think this is something that's going to stick?
Yes, but a few years ago, people were asking me, because I was excited about Atmos, and there was some cynicism a few years ago, like,
Really?
oh yeah, I know. We've been here before with SACD. Right.
This conversation so many times.
I've been here before with DVD audio. You know, I still have a DVD audio player. Maybe Paul has a DVD audio player. You know, how many discs do we have? Maybe 10. You know, yeah.
12.
12. Yeah, exactly. So and then a few years ago, if you'd asked me this a few years ago, my response would have been, I don't care because this is the best possible presentation. And if you want the high-end experience, you know, you want the creme de la creme, we're going to do this slightly expensive niche thing to make it great. And you'll have that documented, you know, in the long run, so you can get that experience if you want. That was before it exploded into music streaming.
Mm.
And that was before soundbar technology changed and all the devices changed. That was before the headphone algorithm for listening to immersive got better. To be honest, the early versions of the Dolby renderer, the binaural render in headphones wasn't great, and they've improved it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I look back on that moment and think I didn't like it that much, and now I really do. And so I think the reason, it's such a cliche to say that this time is different, right? Okay. But the answer to the reason why this time is different are two reasons. The biggest one is portability.
Mm.
And what I mean by portability is that when Paul and I were making 5.1 mixes, it was a separate mix, and we put it on a DVD audio, and after a while we put it on a DVD video because they wouldn't print DVD audios for us, and it sounded, the AC3 codec didn't sound great. Sorry, Dolby, but it was, you know, it was rocky, and it was a separate thing. It was a whole separate experience. It was literally a different disc. You know, it's like, here's my stereo CD, and then here's this DVD video that I got to put on, and how many people actually could hear that? So the portability is the thing, because you can now make one mix that scales up and down from stereo to headphones all the way up to a movie theater, and still have the same master file.
Mm.
You know, because the mix will unfold to however many speakers you have. That's the one thing. I think that's the most important thing. That portability will keep this format with us in the future. And then the second thing is the device landscape has changed. And you know, I went to Best Buy last Black Friday and I got a soundbar type system for my living room. Sounds great. Sounds way better than the one I could have purchased a year before. You know, so I think we're here. You know.
Okay, this was not on the cheat sheet.
All right.
I wonder, for myself, how much better and how well immersive is going to stay based on how we record things. So for example, in a classical setting or say in a club setting, having an ambisonic array probably would make your immersive mixes sound even more lifelike, right? Is it necessary? Do you think it's necessary to have, say, an ambisonic array for a classical recording in order for your Atmos mix to be the best that it can be in terms of directionality, or are we still okay with conventional setups?
No, we're not okay. And I feel very strongly about this, and Paul back me up. And I can't comment too much about ambisonics because I haven't recorded a lot in ambisonics, but I have used immersive microphone.
Array.
Yeah, so this is most people here probably know this, but there's a really obvious thing, and Morten Lindberg has kind of pioneered this, but many other engineers are doing this, where you're recording something in a live hall, and so the acoustic experience is good. You want to recreate the whole three-dimensional audio experience, and his philosophy is we're going to put a microphone where we're going to put every speaker. So he'll create a 704 microphone array, so you have 7 microphones on the plane where your speakers are, maybe in this room at these angles, and then 4 microphones pointing at the ceiling. I'm not sure, not to diss Morton, I'm not sure that his array works in all circumstances. I've heard many other engineers who record orchestras with different types of arrays, much wider spacing between the microphones. There's 1,000 different ways to do it.
I mean, there are
You know,
all sorts of experiments happening.
and actually, I think this is also another sidebar. Is it Hung Kuk Lee
Yes.
who has the
I
all
was-
the demos? Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking about
He has
him
the demos of all the
specifically.
different microphone arrays. But it makes it. I was joking with a friend of mine that like the best Atmos record ever is solo acoustic guitar in a good hall, because that's what Atmos is for. It's not for, it's not for background vocals flying around the room.
Right.
Right. But it's for recreating the full acoustic experience of being there and making the speakers disappear. Right. And you can use all those extra channels to give you a feeling of space.
But I
You
feel
know,
it needs
so.
to happen at the tracking stage.
100%.
Personally.
It does. We can make good Atmos recordings with a lower number of microphones, but you get to a certain number, it's no longer an honest immersive recording. You know?
Agreed.
So yeah. Sticking with
So-
ambisonics.
I'm sorry.
Jammed it
Sorry. I need head tracking, kids. Don't be. So, in terms of being a studio owner, Al, what advice do you have for future commercial studio owners in metropolitan areas like New York when it comes to immersive formats? Is it worth the investment? I guess is really the bottom line question. Is it something that you feel that other studios in anywhere really should be investing in?
I think it's here to stay, and it's gonna be a part of the landscape. And but it is a financial question because it involves not just the gear and you have to build the room. It has to be a certain size and a certain layout. That's in a metropolitan area that can be challenging. You have to buy all speakers. You have to do all that. Then you have to have expertise that knows how to actually do the Atmos mixing, and that's not trivial. And those, that costs more. So there are financial considerations. But I think if you're willing to invest in that and demonstrate a commitment to the quality of it, there will be work for you in the studio market. It's I think it's going to take off, but it's a slow, steady thing.
It's a slow burn, is
Yeah.
what you're saying.
And frankly, tools like what we've developed make a huge difference because those tedious things that Nathaniel was describing he had to do after he'd finished the mix. He had to do all the down mixes and put all the metadata in it with his cuts and everything. That's a nightmare from a studio owner perspective because it takes a lot of extra time. It's opportunities for things to screw up, and then your client, QC comes back and it's wrong, and it's just that part. The more everybody can remove those elements from this new technology, the quicker it'll be people will be able to adapt it, and it could be more like just part of the standard studio offering. So this is important software in that regard.
And that is also to plug the software a little bit. We want to bring attention to the engineers who are learning the format. We want to bring their attention to all the things they have to think about when you're delivering in the format, right? Which is like, you can make it sound great, but you want to look at all your metadata. You want to look at trim and down mix. You want to look at integrated loudness. You want to look at dB true peak. I sort of feel like I had a leg up because we have a post-production background, so we're accustomed to reading long spec sheets, very detailed technical deliveries when you're making a film or a TV show. There's less of that in the music world, and I think we're jumping through that hoop right now, and that's where Immersive Master Pro is there for, which is an engineer who's getting into it and saying, okay, great, I'm in mix and logic, but are you to spec? You know, can you deliver this? Are you ready? You know, and we'll help you get to that step. So if you're in Logic or you're in Pro Tools and you want to jump out of there and deliver, you know, we can help you with the files.
So the software isn't just proprietary to Pro Tools.
No, absolutely not. No,
So you can use it with Logic, with
despite the
Nuendo.
fact that we're literally working with an ex-Pro Tools guru, one of the conversations I often have with Bob is that I don't want to be Pro Tools centric with Immersive Master Pro.
Okay.
So our input right now, you know, we named it Immersive Master Pro because we were open arms to immersive formats, right? And all of our users want us to be using Dolby tools. So right now, the inputs to Immersive Master Pro are Dolby Atmos master files and ADM files.
So how does that must have been quite a hurdle, trying to make sure that the software works with both Pro Tools and another DAW like Logic or Nuendo or Cubase or
Well, not really. We should back up for a minute, and maybe Bob should interrupt me in a moment here. But we have the benefit. A few years ago, the European Broadcasting Union created the ADM, which is the Audio Definition Model format, which is an open source format for kind of structuring immersive audio. Dolby's using that format, but they're putting a little proprietary data in there to make it specifically Atmos. But ADM files are open source.
Okay.
And so because it's a standard, if a platform like Logic adheres to the standard and we adhere to the standard, we're automatically compatible.
I see.
So I don't have to worry if Nuendo makes an ADM file, as long as they do it right, I don't have to worry about our compatibility because we're doing it right and we're all speaking ADM to each other.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, just following up on that. I mean, you know, a lot of these standards, whether they're SMPTE or AES or EBU or many of the other standards out there, you know, the goal of the standards is to help interoperability for companies like Adobe, Dolby, Avid, Apple, and you know, we sit kind of in the middle. You know, we're the lingua franca for, you know, batch process and immersive files, and so we can import the DAMP files, the Dolby specific files. You know, we can import the ADM files, and then on the kind of the export on the output side, we can export ADM files. So you can take an ADM in and spit an ADM out, or a DAMP in and spit an ADM out. That should be able to be imported, whether it's, you know, Pro Tools or Nuendo or other platforms. And then the other side that we do is different rendering. So you can do, you know, everything from a mono to a 916 and pretty much every other one in between there. And, you know, some of the interoperability problems come when, you know, some companies either don't support the specs properly or the specs are not exactly clear. That's something we run into quite frequently, where companies are trying to do their own custom implementation, or they interpret it slightly differently and release a product or a feature with a different interpretation. And so if you take one of our files and you import it into a multi-mono 916 and you import it into Pro Tools versus Adobe Audition versus Nuendo, the channel order will hopefully be the same, but it might not because the different developers might have either made a mistake, you know, a bug, or had a slightly different interpretation. And that's really where the kind of the compatibility comes in, or the challenge is trying to get it to work right and consistently across all the different applications, and dealing with the individual implementations or limitations or bugs that the different companies have done, or bugs that we've maybe accidentally you know, added.
Never.
Never.
So so I feel like we're running out of time, yeah?
We started a little late, so.
We did. So last question. The future. What are your plans? Is there another software package on the horizon?
There is. We have, so the version that came out in October and that was updated very quickly in November, it does automated editing through our edit mode. We have batch mode, which does batch re-renders. One of the really tricky things with these files is if you're working at a high sampling rate, 96K, the pathway from 96K to delivery to the streaming platforms, if you use Dolby's tools, is long and arduous. It will take you all day long, and we've smoothed that out. So you can go quite rapidly. You can work at high sampling rates all day long and deliver quickly at the end of the day. And we have a whole bunch of loudness features for doing loudness independently with master files, doing them as groups to preserve mastering and things like that. I keep saying next week. I don't think it's actually going to be next week, but it's in the coming days. Very, very quickly now. We've got the update coming out, which includes there's two giant features: trim and down mix, which we're doing right now, and the other one's remove silent channels, which we were talking about. We have improvements in the way that we're handling the UI for dealing with gain. And then I can tell you that we have one feature which has been requested from almost all of our users, and we are hot on the trail of that feature, and we are working very, very hard. And I hope to have more information this year about that particular feature and
So
another release.
You're not going to tell us about.
Everyone
feature.
knows what it is. So,
I don't. So why don't you explain it?
So I'll explain it a little bit, which is our output files right now are all high resolution.
Okay.
So we're outputting ADM files and we're outputting channel-based re-renders. These are all lossless PCM renders. When you're listening to your stream on any of the streaming platforms, whether it's Tidal or Amazon or Apple, what you're actually listening to is what they call Dolby Digital Plus Joint Object Coding, DD plus JOC, which is it's the quote-unquote MP3 of Atmos.
Okay.
It's a good format. It's not great, but it is a required step in listening to your mix after it's on streaming. It's a lossy format, right? So we're very keen on supporting that as a way for our customers to give examples to the clients. This is how your mix is going to sound. So we're looking into that technology.
Great.
Yeah.
Now is the time where we open up the floor to questions from our in-person audience. Rowie, do we have anybody online?
Assuming my Facebook interfacing on my phone is working correctly, no, we don't have any yet. But maybe people that are watching will see we're doing questions and we'll get some. But let's start with our lovely collection of guests here in the room.
Does anyone have a specific question? Come on now. Okay, one hand.
Anthony,
Yes, sir. Congratulations.
let's give you the
on
mic.
that.
Thank you.
Congratulations. I met you last year at Engine Room.
Anthony, can you
That's
tell us
right.
who you are?
Huh?
Please tell us who you are on the somewhere.
I'm a music engineer because I do a bunch of stuff, so I give myself that title.
And your name too, please, so it's on there.
Anthony Rodriguez.
Thank you.
So I work a lot with the render and album assembler. So I see that this might be something of a competitive thing against the assembler and the renderer,
No.
Yes.
right?
Well, I wouldn't say not so much the renderer, because the renderer serves a function that we're not going to compete with. But I will admit publicly that my own frustrations with album assembler would help motivate me to keep working on this project.
So yeah, so it's things like when we're finalizing, a few Atmos files with the EQ, trying to hit the target spec, maybe something that's negative 17, 20 or whatever, and we're trying to do it to negative 18. Add a little bit bass, add a little bit high, mid, or whatever the case is. Is this something that the Master Pro can do?
So you're talking about, in a way, you're talking about two different things. I'm gonna duck in a way because I've been very keen, and we may change this, but right now my philosophy since day one is that we want this to be transparent, right? So I'm trying not to be a quote unquote color application, only because there are other software packages out there that are doing color mastering, right? And some of them are doing a good job, and I don't feel like we need to go down that space. So I want Immersive Master Pro to be as transparent as possible and just get you to your destination without modifying your sound. So in terms of like adding bass and things like that, we don't do that at this point. We don't have any plans for it. Maybe we will in the future. But when it comes to loudness specs and metadata and channel-based formats and delivering previews for your clients, so you can hear binaural, right? Get an idea, what is my mix going to sound like on Tidal, which sounds really great because it's using AC4. Our binaural output is a very, very tight approximation of AC4, so you can get a confident idea of what you're going to hear when you're on Tidal and on Amazon.
So this is something opposed to what the render has, that we could export something to 2.0 direct.
Yeah, so our binaural is actually identical as the renderers. We're using the exact same code.
Okay.
So it's the same thing. And then I don't want to split hairs, but when you're hearing AC4, it's like subtly different. Like, it's like a slightly different thing because it's compressed versus the uncompressed binaural, but it's very tight. It's very close. But yeah, to answer your question, our goal hasn't been, I see in the software, it's sort of the competitive software landscape, companies that are going for making substantial creative changes to your immersive mix. I don't feel like we need to be that player right now, right? I feel like our niche is somewhere else.
But to be clear, the loudness thing is definitely something we're all over. So
Yeah,
if
we
you
got
do
you
it in
covered.
your whole file,
Yeah.
and you're at 17, you want to go to 18, we can totally do that across
Is
a
it-
whole album's worth of stuff, or in a batch sense, or
Yeah.
whatever.
Is it
And
an
we-
automated thing that
Yeah.
I could just dump it in and, hey, I need this?
So
I gotta
in the new
18.
version of Immersive Master
Yes.
Pro, we have a new feature now. You can actually highlight all the files, and you can type in the integrated value you want for 100 files. And Immersive Master Pro in the background will recalculate the individual gain change for every master file, and then give you uniform integrated output. Now that is probably only useful if you have a collection of singles, right? So if you're working on an album and the relative relationships between master files has already been established, we have a preference setting called equally. And if you change the setting from independently to equally, then we preserve the dynamic relationships between all the master files that are loaded. So when we do that, and you've got an album and say, well, I want track 1 and 2 to have the same relationship, but track 3 is the one that's out of spec and is causing the whole album to be out of spec, we'll fix the whole album as auto-correct loudness. So you right-click on the whole thing, auto-correct loudness, click, it's done, and it'll give you the output and show you what your new integrated loudness is, what your new dB true peak is based on all of that, and then you can do your exports from there.
That sounds good.
Yeah, so fast too, thanks to Bob's great
Yes.
work.
But that is largely the thrust of the software, is to do that kind of thing, that tedious kind of thing, easily, and not make it a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tedious.
Who's next?
Can I ask a question?
By all means. Please
Great.
tell us who you are and what you do.
So, hi, I am Ana Luz. I'm an audio engineer for post-production, so I have mixed a couple projects in Dolby Atmos. It's not such of a question, but like I want to see it. I want to use it. I am very interested because at the beginning you were all saying I had a lot of troubles with my clients explaining them because in my first project it was a mini series, so it was like 8 chapters of a project, and they were like, hey, we like it, but we want to make a trailer, so I want this scene and this scene and this scene, and so I have my master files, and they were like, well, just import them into Pro Tools, like if it's a WAV file, right? And I'm like, it does not work quite like that, and it's not that easy. So when you were telling that it's something that you had in consideration for this, I'm like, I want to see it. I want to do it. I really think it's something very useful and something that can take like a very huge load off my shoulders, to say it some way. And so it's not like a question, but like I'm very excited.
It's a request.
Yeah, it's a request. Like, can you please show us?
So the trailers also need to be in Atmos.
Yeah, and it was very stressful because they were like, so we have these people coming down here because the studio was in the basement. So they were like, in 15 minutes, these people are going to come, and I want this scene and this scene from this chapter and this chapter and this chapter. You make it all happen. And I was like, I might need more than 15 minutes because it's not that easy.
So you're asking, I'm guessing you'd like a demo of
Yeah.
some sort? So on the website, what's the website, Nathaniel?
ImmersiveMasterPro.com.
Excellent. You can go there and download a 30-day trial that's fully functional, correct?
Yep.
So for 30 days, you can try it out, and then once you realize how useful it is to you, you can then get your own copy. But you do have 30 days to try it out with full functionality, so you shouldn't have a problem with that. Which I think is what she's asking for.
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Yeah, and-
That you want to try it. Like, it all sounds great. This
Yes.
sounds great. This sounds like the answer to all my prayers.
You're talking about a sort of complicated operation, but if you use our edit mode, you can take existing master files and then take time code in and outs of those master files and put it into our edit mode, which is
Okay.
the left-hand panel in our software. And that will make you new ADM files based on your time code in and out point. So it's not like, I'm not saying that you won't have to go back to Pro Tools. You might, because a trailer is a remix,
Yes.
right? But you might be able to slice up your master files and get the extracts that you need quickly made into ADMs and put those ADMs into Pro Tools, and you're kind of halfway there, you know.
That's
Because
very
you're loading entire episodes into Pro Tools. is
Yes,
enormous
and
headache.
it's very
So, yeah.
difficult because it was also like in this scenario, it was my first project, so
Yeah.
I was kind of lost. So yes, it's like I'm very excited. It sounds great. I want to use it. So thank you.
What's the website again, Nathaniel?
ImmersiveMachines.com.
ImmersiveMachines.com.
Yeah.
Get your 30-day full functionality trial. Do we have any other questions from our in-house
Anybody?
audience? Come on, somebody's got to have a question.
How about a question for the audience? Who in here has already used Immersive Machines Pro?
Right.
We have two people.
Guys, yeah.
For the people at home, there's no camera. two users, including myself, making three. I'm Rowie Shamir, by the way, since you can't see me. Okay, so does anybody in the audience have a question? Or maybe Oscar wants to share some of his experience with the software.
What do you got?
Yes, I'm Oscar. I'm Rhino, mastering engineer. I've used your software quite a bit. It saved me a lot of time. And stressful.
Thank you.
Hours. Yeah. I guess one feature that I don't know if it's been mentioned before that would be nice, at least for display, because the QC process for Dolby Atmos is a thing. Is I use it a lot for both the editing when we did a whole classical piece, just everything with the time code and the edit mode was great, as well as musicals, because the mixing engineer would give each track with different objects and different numbers, but it's seamless transitions. It's impossible to do a seamless transition with the different objects and different, the binaural is medium in one, but then it's near in the other, so came up with a very convoluted way to sort of figure that out. One big ADM and then split it up, which was great using your software and the batch convert. But what I use it a lot for is also the final QC of numbers as well, because it's really easy to pop everything in, as opposed to in the assembler one by one or one by one the render. But
I feel your pain. Yes.
yeah, it's just endless. But there's a way to display just as a final QC that the LFE is filtered out, because a lot of times the mix engineer will forget, and after 18 hours in a session and it's a 45 track album, I might have skipped one LFE, and I have to then, our way of QCing is we pop everything into Pro Tools, go into RX and make sure that the
You're loading the LFE channel into a spectral editor to see if there's anything above 100 hertz or 80 hertz.
That's like our
yeah.
last visual spec to make sure that it was cut out, because they will catch them in QC. So even not having an LFE, but just a display that says red light, you're above 100 or whatever it is, would be a nice little last QC feature.
Yeah, I think Bob and I have been talking about this. It's on the list. I like your implementation of it, because Bob and I were talking about this, and my initial implementation was let's have a selectable filter with a preference setting, so you can apply it, but there's the danger of double applying.
Yeah.
Right? and especially if the filter was set somewhere else, because people have different preferences of where this is happening. And then for people who don't understand this, I just want to contextualize it, because the in any format, not just Atmos, like 5.1, the 0.1 is a full spectrum channel. It's a full channel. It's not a filtered channel. And if you send higher frequencies down that channel, weird things can happen on the consumer end, right? And so you always want to filter that channel, typically, you know. But I like your implementation, because what you're suggesting is that we have a spectrum flag.
Yeah,
In
just
addition
flag it.
to, yeah. I was actually thinking about fixing it, which is to say you can apply this filter, but having a flag that indicates frequencies above a certain amount, above a certain loudness.
Mm-hmm. And even
Yeah.
because you're so flexible in your software of, you know, I want my gloves to be at this amount or that. You can even say check it for 150 and below, or above,
Right, yeah, preference setting for,
100
yeah.
or 300 or whatever it is
Yeah.
for. You know.
Now, you know, when Bob and I were doing, you'd think a feature like remove silent channels would be really easy. It's in, we've done it. I think we've done the best implementation. Basically, nobody has this feature. We're the only ones doing it. I think our implementation is really good. When you get into the nuts and bolts, it gets complicated, because in an analog workflow, what's silence?
Yeah.
Might be minus 80, right? So we have thresholds right now for adjusting to determine silence is not always digital silence or digital black. It can be something else. So we'd have to have some sort of adjustment, which is to say if you have some spurious energy at minus 90 at 1K, that's fine, because it's minus 90, you know. So I kind of think that's a good idea. So it's a really good idea. Bob, do you
Limitations around what is allowed by Dolby with the beds, since the LFEs are part of the beds. So like when you're removing silent channels, they're in the software. There are two different kind of like sliders that you can adjust thresholds on. One is for objects and one is for beds, and you will only drop a bed if all channels of that bed are below that threshold. And so if you had audio in the center channel and silence across all the others, you wouldn't actually drop a specific bed unless all channels in that bed were below the threshold. And since the LFEs are part of the bed, that's kind of a thing that we need to think about going forward.
we had it back to the beginning of the conversation with certification. Bob and I went to a meeting with Dolby, and I said, we're going to do remove silent beds. And they freaked out. Like, you can't do that. I said, don't worry, we're not going to break beds. It's all or nothing. So our feature is, you know, you have one sample above the threshold on any channel in your bed, and your whole bed is preserved. You know, so we're not breaking beds. We're just taking the whole bed in or out. You know?
And we're also maintaining channel orders across objects and beds.
And actually, that's a big thing. If you've ever used Album Assembler, that stuff gets scrambled.
It's good. Yep.
And I know why they do the scramble, so I don't want to diss Album Assembler, because they had a different engineering goal than we have, and they had to do the scramble to get to that goal. The way that we build Immersive Master Pro, we don't have that problem. So we preserve the locations of all your beds and objects as they were in the original file.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so if you round trip you start with a jam for an ADM, you put it in, you remove beds or objects, and then you output an ADM and you bring the ADM back in, and you know, if you took a screenshot of where the audio is in the channel order, it will be identical. Or the positions will be maintained. So if you have an object that's in channel 37 and you stripped out other objects that were below that, we're not going to move that one around. It's going to stay in the same place.
Yeah. But yeah, no, great idea with the flag. I love that. Thank you, Oscar.
Yeah.
Have we got any other questions or?
I could make a statement, but let's see if any of our other guests want to ask any questions. Anybody? Okay, well, I've been using the software since September 2024, and just prior to its release, and it's been really useful for me. I think I should just iterate something that maybe people that don't use this or don't do Atmos can understand a little bit more about the benefit of this software. One of the things is that, of course, in the Dolby renderer, you can do what's called re-rendering, and you can re-render the different file formats. And you can do them in a bulk format, even though I believe it goes through them one at a time. And not to say anything disparaging about Dolby, but it's rather slow. And it takes quite a bit of time. And so that's one really great thing about the software, is that you can generate all the versions that were described earlier, from binaural all the way to 1916 in one time, and it really doesn't take very long at all. It organizes it really nicely in a folder with all your various versions, so that's a great thing. And the other thing is the setting of the LUFS, the integrated level, to be what you want. Now, this is particularly useful for me because when I started with Atmos, I was completely aware of LUFS and what the specs are. I'm an AES person for a long time. But at the same time, when I mix, whether it be stereo or immersive, I tend to just go for the vibe and not be too overly concerned with the red meter. Or, of course, I'm not trying to overdrive or load things up. I'm using my ears, but once I'm in a balanced state and my volume is where I'm going to be listening at the hopefully calibrated Dolby listening monitor level, which is rather high, I can tell my mix is in the right place from my experience. Now, the first time we did an Immersive Machines demonstration, we all had the benefit of bringing our mixes in, and I, again, wasn't concerned about my levels. And we had a playlist of some of Nathaniel's mixes and some other people in mine as well. And we had to keep going over to the monitor level for the Rowie mixes because they were so freaking loud and hot. So, and that's because I wasn't delivering, just to be clear. I was just enjoying the Atmos, starting first in stereo and binaural as I did in the beginning, which I always encourage people to work that way until they get their multi-speaker setups going. And then later when I got my 916 setup going at my place in Jersey City, I was enjoying the mix and not worrying so much about the spec. So this, of course, made Nathaniel laugh and have a good old time at my expense, which I was fine with. Anyway, I received the software, and then I ran the 10 or 20 Atmos mixes that I had done at the time through the process and brought them to -18. I actually set it to -18.1, and let it rip, and then proceeded to listen in both my environments, binaurally and then at my studio in 916. And I was really impressed. It didn't at all make my sound, change my sound. It just put my level in the right place. It didn't involve any compression or limiting or anything that a traditional engineer might think would happen to do this. So, so I would say that it's sort of the nonconformist, like a Rowie Shamir type problem, where you do what I'm doing, where you get a nice balance and mix, but you're not looking at the meter. You then use your imp to set the level to the standard for what you're providing, which is usually -18, unless it's a different streaming environment or anything like that. But anyway, extremely useful, really great sounding. I have not yet grabbed the update, which is coming out soon, because I've been fortunate enough to be like a limited beta tester for the team. So highly recommend it. Get the demo, try it out. If you're in Atmos already, you'll find it extremely useful and super powerful tool. And that's my 2 cents on that.
Thanks, Rowie.
Yeah, thanks.
We even contained the Rowie mix.
Yes, tamed.
Yeah.
Tamed. That 80s,
Oh
that
my
80s
God.
guy has been tamed.
Do we have any other questions? Anything, comments? Quips? No?
Double
Well.
check that there's nothing in there.
Thank you, Bob, for beaming in from Colorado.
Do we
You are
have
good
any
beer.
questions really
Just double
from
checking.
Facebook?
Just double checking because he's got a little bit more healthy way to watch the feed. Do you see any questions in
We
there?
have a thanks very much and a great show.
Okay.
Well, thank
take
you,
it.
whoever said that.
Well,
Oh, we just
Sorry,
lost
y'all,
the
that
line.
that's it. You know,
That means the
the,
sun just
the
set.
landlord says it's last call. Last call, everybody.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming today. Thank you so much. And obviously, we'll have a little time to chat informally outside. And yeah, that's.
You know, you might want to say the reason you come to these events in person is you then get to hang out and listen to Dolby in a 714 room here in Dubway, for example, that you probably don't have that experience every day in your home. So always good to join in on the AES events in person when you can. We, like I said earlier, we have another one coming up on April 9th about atom tones. And even shortly after that, we have a really exciting one we haven't announced yet. It's about broadcasts from the past. And today, on a very famous show that generally broadcasts on Saturdays, I've said enough. And thank you, Immersive Audio, and thank you, Dubway, for hosting the AES New York section.
Okay.
Thanks.
And we'll be
Thank you,
ha-
guys.
And we'll be having a raffle soon for the people that came.
There's beer and wine and food out there still, I think.
Yeah.
So have some.